Once upon a time, there was a beautiful house on the lake. The house had a big, warm fireplace, and it was surrounded by a lush forest. The house was owned by a kind old woman named Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith loved to bake cookies and tell stories to the children in the village. One day, a young boy named Billy was walking through the forest when he came across the house. Billy had never seen the house before, and he was curious. He knocked on the door, and Mrs. Smith answered. Mrs. Smith welcomed Billy into the house, and she gave him a cookie and a glass of milk. Billy told Mrs. Smith that he was lost, and she offered to let him stay the night. Billy and Mrs. Smith spent the evening together. They talked and laughed, and Billy told Mrs. Smith about his life. Mrs. Smith told Billy stories about the forest, and she sang him songs. Billy had a wonderful time at the house. He felt safe and loved, and he didn't want to leave. But the next morning, he woke up and Mrs. Smith was gone. Billy looked all over the house for Mrs. Smith, but he couldn't find her. He went outside and looked around the forest, but he couldn't find her there either. Billy was sad to leave the house, but he knew he had to go home. He said goodbye to the house, and he walked back through the forest. As Billy walked, he thought about Mrs. Smith. He wondered where she had gone and why she had left him. He also wondered if he would ever see her again. Billy never saw Mrs. Smith again, but he never forgot her. He often thought about her, and he wondered what had happened to her. The end.